Hello, I'm Vanessa Cruz.
Hi, I'm Claudia Mason, and we have Phil Salonica behind the scenes as producer joining us.
We connected as coaches through ICF Austin, and we launched this podcast called
Coaching Chronicles, unleashing your true potential and redefining what's possible.
Join us as we unravel the transformative power of coaching for leaders, professionals, and curious minds alike.
Where we dive into captivating conversations with expert coaches, leaders, and professionals who will share their stories, experiences, and wisdom on overcoming life's challenges. Discover the art of guiding others towards success and witness the enchanting synergy between personal growth and professional achievement. Hello. So lovely to have you here with us, Jakob. Hello, Phil. We will not be joined by Vanessa Cruz on camera today. Life throws us technical difficulties every now and then for all of us. So she's behind the scenes as one of our producers. So Jakob, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being with us. So I'd love to hear, what comes up right away, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself if you would like to. But I'd love to, I feel like because the times we're in and what's happening on the international stage, I can't imagine that anyone is not affected in some way by what's going on. And, I know that certain items that were influential to you, an essay on the death of my husband in June 2019 on Medium, had kicked off you writing about grief. The book, No Proper Grief, which was published in 2022. These are influential to you. And I guess since I'm just overwhelmed by what's happening in Israel, I'd love to hear what brought you to grief. If you'd like to jump in there. If not, jump in wherever you want, but here we are.
No worries. Just by way of quick introduction, I am an executive coach. I grew up in the world of HR, global HR and high tech, which is what brought me to coaching executives and C-suite executives. I was an internal coach for a long time. And then, what brought me to a better understanding of grief and a different relationship with grief is I lost my husband in 2019. It was unexpected, and it was traumatizing, and which I can talk a little bit more about trauma's role in grief, but I never expected to be someone who was an expert in grief. And maybe expert is too strong a word. I never expected to be someone who knows so much about it, and who has experienced it in such a profound way. And so, what I can say about the article is, the essay that appeared on Medium in 2019 was 6 months after I lost him. And writing is my way of processing and dealing with things. And so I wrote the essay and put it out there. And to my surprise, it garnered the most views of anything I had ever written, and was picked up by Medium and published behind their paywall. So it kicked off the idea that maybe I had some things that I could say that resonate with others who are experiencing grief in their own way. So that's what started the whole thing for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. How do you feel? I mean, gosh, again, the whole idea of where we're at. So personal grief, you just spoke about clearly. And then you in your business as a coach, compassion comes up a lot for you. I remember reading that about you in your bio. And then dealing with grief at the personal level, helping teams in C-suite arenas. How then, if you have someone right now that you're coaching, a team, and someone has a relative that's just been obliterated over there in Israel, whatever side, because all one race, human race. So I just need to say that. How do you then approach grief for that team member within that team with what's going on now and what they have to do? Talk about it. Give it to me.
Well, and what I will say is that my approach to coaching is holistic. And I am an executive coach largely because I work in the context of business and I work in the context of executives in the C-suite, but those are human beings and they come to the table with everything that we come with as humans. And so when I approach grief by a single team member in the context of the team, we talk a lot about what that means for them personally and how it affects their ability to lead, participate in the team, whatever their role may be. Because I think, the important thing to remember is that we all experience grief very differently, and everybody they need to be acknowledged for what they're going through. And I talk a lot about, you brought up the term compassion, and that is absolutely something I talk about. But I like to be clear with people that compassion is our ability to act, because we are moved from a place of sympathy in order to act. Whereas as coaches, we often delve into empathy because that helps us to understand our clients and our clients' perspective. But that empathy is simply being able to observe from our client's perspective. And, which is ideally where we want to be, since coaching is such a Socratic method. But ultimately, people who are on a team with someone else can be moved to compassion and can lead from a place of compassion and work from a place of compassion. So I think it's important for people to understand where their colleagues are coming from and what they may need in that moment. And, one of the things I discussed in the book that I think is very important in the workplace is that when we acknowledge someone's experience of grief, we really need to just sit with them, because that's what they need. They don't need our advice. They don't need us to tell them it will be better. They don't need us to tell them what's coming next, because we don't know that as much as we think we might from our own experiences. But simply being there beside them and sitting with them and saying, yeah, this sucks. And knowing that, they have someone next to them who sees them for who they are is incredibly important.
Yes. And would you say that that has to do also, or where does you also are one of your skills when you're coaching is helping relieve this burden of imposter syndrome? I know that's important to you, if I'm correct, because I remember that from your bio, and how grief can kind of play. I mean, how grief can sabotage almost everything, and heighten that feeling of imposter syndrome, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think of the Kubler-Ross model of grief, which is this, hypothetical model, because it doesn't always hold true, but it's the best thing that we've got, at least in the literature. And it talks about the different stages. And I think she posits 5 stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. When you think about this idea of anger, sometimes that comes first for some people. And, they can be very angry and they want someone to blame, the greater universe. Why did this happen to me? But then there is the depression piece that can sneak in, where they start thinking about, I've lost something really important. I must not be good enough to keep it. Right. And so to your point about imposter syndrome, this idea that I'm not good enough or I don't deserve to have the things that I worked hard for in my life, that I really wanted in my life, can absolutely exacerbate imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Gosh, just listening to you, it feels moved that we're all the similarity. We're all so similar. These themes come up in so many groups, right? The human condition, the question of it all, Jakob. And oh gosh, I just had a question. Sorry, I just went blank for a sec. Phil, you can jump in. It's going to come back.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being here, Jakob, and your perspective and kind of, sharing your story. Meeting you through ICF has been one of the highlights of this past year, and getting to work with you on the board has been such a joy. I'm wondering what piece community may have played in your healing process throughout your experience.
Well, and I do talk a bit about the importance of community in the book, because, that story for me is an interesting aspect to my healing, because, when I lost my husband, I didn't have the community I thought I had. And, some of that was, a variety of things that came into play. I came out late in life. A lot of people decided to abandon me because I wasn't the person they thought they knew, because I had begun to live my truth. There were, people who backed away when my husband and I decided to start a family and have children. And we just weren't, the cocktails at 5 o'clock group anymore. So there was that piece. And, and then let's be honest, someone who's lost someone close to them, that's a sad situation. And not a lot of people want to be around that. And so all of those things, exacerbated the fact that I didn't have a whole lot of people around me. And I didn't really have a sense of community when I lost him. There's a chapter in the book, though, on, I call it the virtual park bench and digital pigeons, because there were 2 or 3 people who stayed, who stuck around, who really decided that they were in it for the long haul with me, and that they would sit next to me on that virtual park bench and feed those digital pigeons and just talk, whatever it may be. And that's why I'm such a proponent of being able just to sit with someone, because so often we miss this idea of community because people want a hands-off approach because we're not moving forward in grief the way they want us to. We're not going where they want us to go. It doesn't meet their timeline. And there's this idea that grief is a year-long process. And after a year, you should move right along and be just fine. And I just don't find that to be true. And I was accused often of wallowing in my grief or, being too attached to it. And, while those things are specific psychological issues, that wasn't what I was experiencing. I was getting to know my grief and I was getting to understand it. And because you cannot go forward unless you understand what you're walking forward with. And so to your point, this idea of community is only something I've started to rebuild. And I'm only able to do that because of the compassion that I felt from the people who decided they would stay in my life and who wanted to be a part of it.
Wow. Can I just say community and time, and then patience with oneself. No man is an island. So the whole idea, as you said, of the people that decided to stay, that giving yourself the time you could have done alone, obviously that's within you first, and the holistic approach as you spoke about, but then we need other people so desperately. My God, if the world doesn't show us this time and time again. And so the power, as you said, of your community, what was left of it, if you will, the right people when you were your authentic self, and then more came from that beautiful place. And then what I love how you said the idea of, we are so brainwashed to think that grief is just supposed to take 8 months to 12 months, whatever that is, oh my goodness, as if we're all robots. It just so I just so moved by that. Because once you, as you had just said, Jacob, I'm trying to find the question in it, but I just wanted to respond. That was so beautiful that you said, the idea of the only way to get through it is to go through it. I mean, that whole idea, we have to take the time. Is there anything else you would like to share around that? Because it's so needed right now. Holistic coaching, the whole thing. And it's so big, all of this stuff.
And you touch on a couple of really important things that I highlight with executives when I coach them, because oftentimes people in those executive roles are lonely and they are disconnected because they don't want people to see everything they come to work with, because that may cause them to appear weak, or so they think. So I do explore the idea of connection often with the executives I coach. And I think that my experience has given me an interesting perspective that helps me ask some questions for them around their own approach to building community and having connection with others. And, the other thing that I will say is there is this idea of complicated grief, which is something new that has been added to the DSM. And I think people are too quick to armchair diagnose that. And I just want to be clear that sometimes grief takes longer for some people. And unless you are a licensed therapist, you're not going to know if someone's experiencing complicated grief. So let's leave that to the professionals and just be there for the people who need you.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's hard for us to accept, right? Just as people, we want to be that, person who can say the right thing or make the right action to make somebody feel better. But I mean, we know it as coaches, the power of the pause, the power in silence, just sitting there, like you said, being there with them in the moment, processing it, not trying to change it, not trying to cheer them up, just being there with them. It's
And the
powerful.
most important thing is for them to be seen. I mean, the most powerful thing that you can do is just to say, I see you, instead of trying to find platitudes or quotes or whatever it may be. Just for someone to be seen is powerful. And, it's interesting because I talk a lot about resilience as well. And actually the part of the title of the book is about a journey of resilience. And I found as I explored that people have so many strange ideas of what resilience actually is, because in their minds, they think, oh, you're going to bounce back exactly the way you were. That's resilient. And, that's a big no. So, because my idea around resilience tends to be this, approach that we are able to successfully adapt to how our life changed. That doesn't mean that we're back the way we were. I mean, my life is nothing like it looked when I had thought I achieved everything I was looking for and wanting. It changed. It completely changed. And so my ability to be resilient is to be able to have these mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility approaches that allow me to adjust. And that's the thing I needed to discover. And that's the reason I needed to sit with my grief, is that you have to understand, how do I want to react? Because the initial reaction to that is, I don't want to adapt. I liked the way my life was. Thank you very much. Well, the truth is you can't have that anymore once it changes. And, and then you realize I have to adapt. It's adapt or, fail. And then you get to the question of, how do I want to adapt? Right? Because, and that is when I think coaching comes in and can be very powerful for someone who is moving forward in grief, because then they have gone through the healing process and they realize they're ready to adapt. Because then the question comes up is, what does the adapted me look like? And that is a powerful place to start.
Right. Adaptability. Absolutely. And Jakob, what was the former self? How did it inform who Jakob is today? In other words, your background before you decided to be a coach. The only constant is change, is also what we're talking about. So how did you shift into, how did you find your adaptability?
It was interesting because, when we talk about the constant is change, I agree with that, but I would also say that change is, it is not at the same level all the time. We experience bursts of it and waves of it, and change hits us when we least expect it. And so when I lost my husband, I was at a place where life had settled in to a wonderful groove, right? And so you start to forget that things can change. And so I'm in this groove. I had been doing global HR. I would travel around the world, being in all sorts of interesting places. I had someone I loved to come home to. I had little kiddos who looked up at me and smiled all the time when I would come home. And so it was a great life. It was absolutely great. And I tried to keep that going when I lost him. So the year I lost him, I was still trying to do that. And it suddenly occurred to me that, I was failing at what I was doing. I wasn't any good at it anymore because of the context. And so I needed to do something differently. And because I had always coached internally and also had some select clients on the side, I thought, I'm going to go full steam into being a full-time coach. That's what I want to do. I prepared for it. I had my credentials. I had my training. So, it just felt right. So I hung out my shingle and I thought, I'm growing my practice from just a few people to, a lot of people. And then the pandemic hit the very next month. So, the before me brings all this business knowledge to the table about running a business, but I'm in a new environment that no one's ever seen or lived through before. So that was a little fascinating. My coaching journey started as the world shut down. And, and it's interesting to me too, because, I think the whole pandemic process, many of us are still grieving what we lost, because we lost who we were pre-pandemic. We've had to adjust and adapt to be flexible. And, I hear people say, oh, things are back to normal, but to what normal? It's a new normal, right? I mean, and it's, we're now in this phase of trying to figure out how we move forward. But a lot of times people don't look at what we went through and sit with it and understand it. They want to look back at who they were and just pick up where they left off. And I don't think you live through a global pandemic and do that.
No. Yeah. I don't think you live through a full lived life and do that, but that's, I guess, a whole other subject. The phrase you mentioned before was the only constant is change. And I very much believe that. We can dive into that, but you've just given so many examples of that. Exactly. The only constant is change. It's going to be changing all the time. Well,
and one of the things that I think that, that comes up for me with that is the idea that, when I talk about I was in a good groove, that happens to a lot of us. We get into a great groove and we forget that life is going to change at some point, good, bad, or otherwise. And, so I think we're lulled into a false sense of security and we forget that constant.
Yes. And Jacob, when you spoke about the pandemic, I mean, boy, if that ain't the truth, and how it affected all of us, and this whole, and the human need to go, it's okay, it's back to normal, nothing's changed. Mm-hmm. We can, is that fear of death. We got through it. Yeah. Why do we cling to that? Do you think? I mean, I have tons of my own thoughts about that. I think it's always fear of death is the trap.
Psychological safety.
Yeah. And why? Safe from what? From dying, ultimately. What are we really frightened of,
The unknown.
Yeah. Well, and it's, one of the things that I work a bit with is doing some trauma-informed coaching, because a lot of times executives who are struggling have, not fully understood what what trauma means for them. And the idea of a pandemic is a traumatizing experience.
Yes.
Because it alters our view of the world as a just, safe, and predictable place. Right. And so I hate this phrase, good vibes only. I just, it makes me want to throat punch someone when they say it, because that ignores what it means to be human. Yeah. Because as humans, we have bad vibes. We experience bad things. And it's okay to acknowledge them and to say, this is bad. But then it's what you do after that. And the only way you can do anything after that is to understand what the bad vibe is. So
that's right, to fully go into all one's feelings, which again, what's happening in Israel certainly is forcing, I think, those of us who are wanting to go into the consciousness movements and are part of that. I myself, as a spiritual life coach and highly intuitive, that's my jammy. I mean, if we can't feel our pain when people are being slaughtered, and it happens all around the world, all the time, domestically, internationally, since time immemorial, humans slaughter humans. Oh my gosh, what a horrific, and how do we get through to the next phase of the humanity that just loves? But this is trauma and what to do with it, feeling into all of it.
Yes. And it's, it's so interesting as you bring up that particular topic. I think, the thing that comes up for me is this idea that anytime we talk about things like that, because we live in such a polarized society, people want us to take a side.
Oh.
And I'm like, let's not talk about the sides. Let's just talk about the fact that what's happening is horrific. All in all together, it is a horrific situation. And as a human being, I can feel that. And I can feel that is, that is painful for us as a society. And I want that to find resolution. And I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to acknowledge the things that are happening in our world and say, that's painful to me, without having to jump immediately to picking a side or having an opinion or a viewpoint, just being able to acknowledge that's painful to me.
Exactly. And letting that patience with saying, I am feeling pain, that's painful to me, sitting with it as per your point, and how important time and patience is, and to be heard, and seeing where that gets you to, because ultimately, why is it paining humans? Because we want to love and be loved. All of us are the same, no matter what ethnicity or where you're from. So it's just, it is quite something. Phil?
Yeah. As we get close to wrapping it up, Jacob, if there's someone out there listening who's maybe experiencing some of the things that we've talked about, besides reading your article from 2019 and going on Amazon and getting your bestseller, what was one piece of advice that you would give that person?
Well, this may be a little bit more than one piece, because the first thing I would say is don't listen to advice. The second thing I would say is your grief is your own, and however you feel that is okay. And that's the best place that you can start, is knowing that whatever you're feeling about that situation, it's okay.
I love that.
So beautiful.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you, Jacob, for your wonderful, authentic personality and self, and being authentic and real with us, and your incredible expertise and your incredible value and to this profession of coaching, the value that you bring. And I appreciate you with what you shared with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Until next time, I really hope you have the day you deserve. Love ya.
And remember, when all else fails, just keep breathing.
Thank you for joining us today on Coaching Chronicles. We hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights and practical strategies. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast.